And I'd like to say a big welcome to Vasiliki and Anna today, who are going to talk to us about COP28 with particular emphasis on education. I think all of us here probably have our opinion about COP28. It'd be interesting to see what the impression we're going to get today it will be. So I would like to hand over to Vasiliki now, who would introduce Anna, and we can get going. So welcome to both of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ian. Thank you for actually agreeing to host this webinar with us. So I'm Vasiliki Koupi. I think I know many of you. I'm currently chairing the London Regional Centre of Expertise on Education for Sustainable Development. And we are extremely lucky because Anna is one of our members, and she will present on her experience in COP28. She actually attended the COP28 in person. I attended it online from London, but yeah, I can feed into the discussions after her presentation. But first, a little introduction to who is Anna. So Anna Romero works for Wellington College in the UK. She started in 2014, but in 2023, she became the head of sustainability for Wellington College International. And she is responsible for working on sustainability and climate education topics within the international family of schools across China, Thailand, Jakarta, and India. In her role, she actually inspires a vast number of students and staff in work concerning sustainability and global education across and beyond school life. She is responsible for building international partnerships, networking, and collaboration with third-party organizations. But before joining Wellington College, she worked for many years as an advisor in climate to local governments in Latin America, as well as she was an environmental expert for international NGOs in the field of environment, climate change, and global citizenship. She actually first attended COP in Poznan, Poland, in COP14, and then since 2019, she has been a senior advisor to the Mexican government on the international climate negotiations, providing expertise in capacity building and action for climate empowerment. I think I will hand over to Anna now for her presentation.
Thank you very much. It's great to meet you all and to be here, and it's great to meet other members of the network. That's really nice. Well, even if COP28 seems to be quite far away now, the results is still having an impact on what's coming, especially now in June in the intersessionals that are going to be happening quite soon. And since there were lots of things hanging out there without clarity, the intersessionals looking towards Baku are becoming essential talks. So it will be great to share your perspectives with me. Feel free to stop me during the presentation. You don't need to wait until we finish the whole presentation to have this chat. So if you have any comments, feel free to raise your hand, and then we can have that interaction. Excellent. So thank you very much for introducing me, Vasiliki. So I'm trying to advance, and how can I advance? Oh yeah, there you go. Sorry. So I have divided this presentation in what Dubai climate talks were, the significance of COP28 in addressing climate change, and COP28 and education. And I apologize because I have to divert my side to the right. I have two screens, and this one screen is having the presentation and the other one is having the camera, but I am paying attention to all of you. So basically, when every conference of the parties and every presidency that is hosting the talks, usually they get to have ambitious targets that they are established and announced. In the case of Dubai, they were putting obviously again ambitious climate targets as countries setting out to commit to ambitious climate targets within their national determined contributions. That is one of the most important elements that countries should be committed to represent and to deliver every year as part of membership of the convention, but not all the members are doing so. So it was an encouragement as well to reach these climate targets as part of the NDCs, reducing greenhouse emissions, increasing renewable energy use, and improving energy efficiency. The global carbon market was another one with the aim of enhancing international cooperation on carbon trading and the global carbon market, which included the mechanism for trading carbon credits. Climate finance, a very relevant and really transcendental topic with all the COPs around the countries that will contribute financially to help developing nations to adapt to climate change and transition to sustainable practices. This topic has been ongoing for many, many years. As participant in the COPs, this has been a very sticky point, everything that has to do with the money, and not necessarily because we don't have the money within the nations that could provide it and could do more to provide it, and private entities. The main challenge seems to be sitting within the mechanisms to operate those finances. But we will be talking further about it in the next one. In the next slides. Adaptation and resilience, something extremely important now. We are not talking anymore about mitigation. Mitigation is still there, is still present, but nowadays adaptation is an extremely important topic due to the changes that are happening extremely fast. Especially with vulnerable communities and communities that are nowadays threatened by being displaced to other territories, such as small islands in the Pacific that are losing their territories, and where are they going to be ending up at the end? Which countries will be hosting them or accepting them and giving them that citizenship, for example? Nature-based solutions, so efforts to protect and restore ecosystems such as forests and wetlands, and a way to mitigate climate change and enhance resilience. Number 6, the technology transfer and innovation, agreements on technology transfer between developed and developing countries, as well as discussion on fostering innovation for sustainable development. This is really much focused as well in the topic of science. Science plays a massive role to really put this innovation and transferring technology as something relevant. The strand of discussions in the negotiations on science every year seems to be in a very big trap as well. Is a topic that is controlled by certain countries and that they don't let it advance as much as possible. So the Dubai climate talks were trying to really push forward the science area. However, the results were not as effective as we were going to be expecting. Then gender and climate change, obviously the highlight of the importance of the gender equality in climate action. And when we are talking about gender equality, is really touching on the topic as well of human rights. Human rights was a very restricted topic during COP27. Now during COP28, we could advance a little bit, but not as much. Some relevant topics precisely in documents such as the global stocktake were not taking in consideration the topic of human rights, even in some of the papers was erased, which was a massive backup for the topic of gender and climate and human rights as such. The other topic is youth engagement, emphasize the role of youth in climate action, global collaboration, the importance of international collaboration to tackle climate change is a recurring theme that is always across this international collaboration. So those were the central topics that the COP was willing to really tackle. And what came out in reality, I don't know if you remember, but the first day of the negotiations, and usually the negotiations are divided by relevant days, and every day touches a topic that is related to the initial themes I presented. So I don't know if you remember the first day exactly, they announced really like big, saying, oh, there is a new fund in loss and damage, and lots of countries are giving money and so on. But in reality, this was nothing really big, because what it showed is that, well, the UE, as well hosting these negotiations, obviously they put the most money. But if you get to see the amount of money that other countries were contributing to, it was minimum. And for example, the US and Japan just giving that kind of money is insignificant. And they were telling, well, there is money somewhere else, so why should we contribute? So even though this was a massive announcement for loss and damage, and loss and damage is a very important fund that we need, still these kind of political moves are not really helping the process and are really detrimental in the belief that this can move forward with the goodwill of countries really taking steps that are forward. So in general, the aggregate for the fund was $423.1 million, which is very little money for what is needed. And as I say, the mechanisms of how this operates are the challenge. So there is lots of unhappiness among especially countries in the South, for example, that this has been proposed to be managed by the World Bank. The World Bank sits within the obviously rhythms of the United States. And usually for countries to get the money when they have suffered an emergency takes sometimes even 2 years for them to access the funds. And the North is claiming that the South should have more transparency and less corruption systems for them to be able to access those funds. So it's a system that in a way is either is the egg or the hen first. And no one really wants to move the step forward for clarity in these finances, but there needs to be a point in which we can really trust and then say that we can move this forward to really help nations that are hit immediately by emergencies. The first global stock take ever took place. So it's a process that helps from the Paris Agreement to assess the progress every 5 years and mobilize a strong climate action. So this was relevant because, as I say, the national determined contributions, which are the political core of the actions of countries, is what is reported every year to the convention. This was the first one, and it has a 5-year window for countries to then report their actions. But as I said, it was a very weak process, the one that was established at the end, with lots of interest to not make massive commitments. So I personally think that the global stocktake is weak towards 2025. So we will see what happens in Baku, obviously, but the expectation probably won't be that high. The best outcome that we could expect, because it's going to be hosted in Latin America, COP30, is going to be probably looking forward to Brazil. Then the next outcome was the first international agreement to tackle fossil fuels. That was a big announcement as well by the presidency. New commitments to reduce methane emissions, create more sustainable food systems, and protect forests. The global goal on adaptation had very weak language on future finance commitments. While new financing was announced on adaptation for new different funds, this still falls below what is needed to address the global adaptation finance gap in developing countries. The UNEP was estimating this to be 215 billion to 387 billion. So if we get to see the numbers that were provided to the loss and damage and the numbers that the Global Adaptation Fund is needing, is massive difference of what the countries are really contributing at. So as I say, this is a very, very sticky topic. And those were basically the major outcomes of Dubai. It's a disappointment that the COPs have become a circus. The focus of the negotiations of the COPs has been lost strongly. We saw that negotiators this year, when all of a sudden we were 130,000 registered attendants to the COP. But the persons that we go with the delegations, we are exactly the same number negotiating. And the focus of the negotiations as such, that is precisely the diplomatic field to really put the strength in negotiating documents, has been diverted into countries having their pavilions showcasing how marvelous they are, or the other areas that are around showcasing most of the times what is going on in their areas of expertise on climate change. And that is for the blue zone. For the green zone, that is the public access area for the members of the public to have a taste of what is climate change, how it's been discussed, and so on. I think it was very good organized in that sense, that there was lots of access for the public, youth, children, and people with disabilities to have access to these kind of talks. But still, sometimes the queues to access for negotiators to our meetings, it was taking us more than an hour standing there passing the filters, and you were telling, who are all these people that are not negotiators? What is really happening? Why the attention being diverted? So we have parties have made a strong call to the secretariat to really try to refocus what the COPs are, even though the system, I mean, now we are going to go to COP29, and we still see that the emergency of dealing with climate change has advanced very slow, especially since Paris. And even before, when we were having Kyoto in place, seems that the most important topics need a more push and more relevance than just standing there and going COP after COP after COP with more or less the same language. So there is lots of pressure in the convention to try to rethink how the COPs are going to be managed. And you see the massive difference every time that in June is the intersessionals. We don't have all those side events. We don't have any other rhythm of activities. It's just purely when the bodies are meeting, the SBI and SVESTA, and it's pure negotiations, and sometimes it's really more effective, and the outcomes that we bring to the COPs are more like target oriented. As for education, I share with you 2 articles I wrote in the past, in this last year, about education and my perspective. If you want to have a look on them, I put them in the chat, the links. But basically, education for sustainable development is still very present, especially through UNESCO's activities during the COPs. And they were focusing especially in the role of education in building awareness and capacity for sustainable development, integrating climate change education into formal and informal education systems. Very few countries have advanced in acknowledging the importance of climate education as part of the curriculum, such as Italy or Mexico or countries that they have put this forward, applying the current Glasgow work program or work plan for action for climate empowerment, such as Dominican Republic or other countries in Latin America. Is strongly highlighted how the informal education systems through NGOs, universities, and other entities that are not necessarily covering within the curriculum are really helping to the process of climate education. And this has been a strong point that was highlighted during the negotiations. The youth engagement, the involvement of youth in the climate action happened throughout the COP, and I think it has been happening since COP27 quite strongly. In this case, during COP28, there was a full dedicated date for youth, which was focusing in education mostly. And the main idea was really trying to show the opportunities for young people to interact with decision makers and make an influence from their perspectives, and feel them empowered to contribute to these climate talks. Um, as you may know, the government of the UAE for the first time named a youth champion, which is separate from the usual entities that are observers of the process of the negotiations, just such as Yongo. Yongo, that is a group of interest that is from the youth. So it seems that this is a very positive step forward. The COP27 named a youth champion as well, but that young person, was not having any political role apart from the advisory one. Now the COP28 champion will be able to really make very strong statements and influence the policy making. Then in education as well, we have capacity building. That was a very strong ground where it was emphasized to the need to address various sectors and form capacities on them, including education, and initiatives to enhance the skills and knowledge of educators, policymakers, stakeholders in general, and communities around the topic of climate change. But one of the most important topics as well in this is it was not only with the aim of teaching, but contributing that how societies and communities can really put their own tools of implementation within their traditions to adapt to climate change, to avoid the matters of climate anxiety as well, especially in young people when they are taught through the traditional curriculum in different countries. That is, it could be related to natural science, geography, or other subjects that they must, and is part of the learning, to get to know what is climate change. But rather than just staying with those facts, really showing that there is areas of opportunities if educators are properly trained and they have that capacity building. Then there was lots of partnership in education. So it was something that happened quite a lot between governments, NGOs, and educational institutions. There was now the Green Education Partnership that was signed by more than 20 nations, for example, that they are really going to be working within climate education and promoting it within their political agendas. The UK is one of those countries that is signing up for it, and it seems to have a quite strong leadership role. And then innovation in education, how to innovate technologies and approaches in education to communicate climate science as solutions. In this, our criticism was that we are thinking of this perspective very much for the North. And we still forget that the South is still lacking the possibilities many times to have access to that technology, and that climate change should be really having that access to the different communities as much as possible in the same level. So we invited the parties, especially from the North, to really reflect about innovation and technology. Then adaptation and resilience in education. They were highlighted, focusing in preparing communities and individuals for the impacts of climate change, and obviously gender and education, showing that in education is essential that we discuss recognizing the differences between and the vulnerabilities in between the roles of women and men in the context of climate action, and how the role of education within the classroom and communities play a very relevant role. Um, so as I mentioned, the Green in Education Partnership Declaration is committing to climate education into their national determined contributions and national adaptation plans. In the case of the UK, we have our sustainability and climate strategy, with different activities that are gonna be aiming to fulfill what is stated as part of our national determined contributions to the 2030. And this obviously was a collaboration between the UAE, the UNESCO, the UNICEF, and well, the four pillars that they are dealing with is greening schools, greening learning, greening capacity, and greening communities. So it's expected to be a common agenda for education that explains this greening education in detail, and how the members of this endorsing this declaration can really follow the paths to establish climate education as a part of the future COPs, for example, as they are reporting back on their NDCs. So towards Baku, what is coming? It's essential to have more clarity in climate finance contributions and in the support of adaptation. The language on future text to meet the goal of staying below 1.5, that now seems unrealistic. Sadly, we are looking every time at the reports of science that we are going above the 1.5 rapidly. And parties' commitment to embed these high-level agreements in their national policies and NDC submissions. Just recently, this month has closed the submissions that countries and parties and NGOs and observers presented for the convention on the different topics. And they are all available online, and is a general consensus that this language needs to be clarified, and the commitment above all is something that is essential to happen. Otherwise, we have a very weak process again, processes that are vulnerable to not really happen and not be implemented in the countries that are needed to be taking steps forward. However, as I explained in the last article that I wrote with one of my colleagues about the hopes that are happening for reasons to be optimistic about the future of the COPs, is that youth and education are moving forward. Every time they have been more taken more seriously by countries, and we hope, by presidencies, and we hope that Baku will be the case, and that youth has is not taken anymore as the flag of like achievements for many countries, just to say that they are doing something, but they are really doing it. The young people voice is now being listened, and having young youth representatives that are part of the political process seems to be helping that. Having the youth champion figure is something that is relevant, and we hope that it becomes something standardized for next COPs. And what we see now is that there is interest for schools and educators to really take these processes on board, and not leave them only that is aside for just policy makers or so on, but to really bring that into the classrooms for students and teachers to really be part of these processes. So we hope that Baku is gonna be the next phase, the next element that is gonna be bringing countries together to discuss in Azerbaijan the green growth as a priority. That's the presidency has announced that the green growth will be their focus. And they need to reconsider how it's possible to update the national determined contributions or the climate plans of countries, emphasizing this green growth. So that will be quite interesting to see how they will be presenting it. And thank you. I think that's all from my side.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, Anna. Shall we move into into questions now? And
Yes,
if you want to have a question, oh, that's probably a good idea. It stops stop sharing the screen, and we can all see each other well. Thank you. That was actually brilliant overview of what was actually happening. My sort of question was very general to start with. Is did you feel that there was an optimistic tone generally among the delegates that were there?
In general, I don't think there was lots of optimism, especially at the beginning when we started with this big announcement, and when we started to see that the global stock take was not really as ambitious as we wanted. For the first time, COP28 was one of the first that I experienced that there was a radical division in between the North and the South. So I wouldn't say that was the best experience. It's sad to see that we see the climate emergency and there is countries that still battling to not really advance and block the negotiations, which was the case of many key words that were in the text. For example, for the global stocktake text, such as related as the relevance of human rights. And we had massive backups in many of the texts that were agreed previously with a strong language. Now they are having quite weak language. And well, the battle will be continuing in the intersessionals now in June to try to rescue some of that language into the advancement, for example. Action for Climate Empowerment, for example, that is the main strand that I have been negotiating on, had a massive, we didn't have any agreement at the end in the language of the final text that we are precisely using to implement the action plan of Glasgow. That is precisely the mechanisms that we are making it work. And basically, it didn't advance because we didn't reach any agreement on finances. So the feeling of most of the countries of negotiators was that finance is one of the biggest topics, and we are not very optimistic that that's really happening within an agreement soon.
Right. Thank you. Anything else to add? Ben?
Thank you very much, Anna. That's a tremendous amount of information there. It's brilliant. Early on, you mentioned about the fact that the focus seemed to be shifted towards adaptation. Although you still referred to the fact that mitigation was still there. And it struck a chord with me because earlier today, I came across a film called the Climate Race film, which some of you may know. But I found it really very good film. And part of the contributions, there were lots of contributions from people like Kate Rayworth and Paul Allen and so on. And one of the points they were making was the fact that unless we stop the emissions, we're trying to hit a moving target, which is going up all the time. And a lot of the work that's going to be done on adaptation is going to be money wasted because in things like barriers to combat sea level rise, but if it then continues to rise and goes over what's been done, then it just goes on. So I wondered if you could say a little more about the extent to which mitigation was still playing a key role there. And if people are interested, I'll put the link to that film in the chat.
Yes, please. That sounds really interesting film. I haven't seen it myself, so I will be very interested. Mitigation is still part of the essential heart of the negotiations. Is one of the strands, but it seems that we know what we have to do. Science is telling us what do we need to do, especially in energy, in transportation, fossil fuels, renewables. So all the elements that are there for us to decrease emissions are out there really telling countries take these options on board now to switch and to change the pattern. And now is the matter for the countries to adopt them. And for example, the massive criticism that COP28 had is that fossil fuels were still there in the picture, and not really big commitments were happening to really say, okay, we are moving completely to renewables, which will be the ideal for us to cut emissions. So the relevance of mitigation is still there. We know what to do. The next phase, I would say, is that in adaptation, we are in the moment that everything is changing so rapidly that we need to build that resilience to continue surviving in a way. And the way is really working is that we are late many times to really put the focus in adaptation. Therefore, it becomes loss and damage. And then it's more costly for governments to then restore, recover, and so on. So therefore, the explanation is that they are preferring to form this fund, the money into adaptation. It sounds quite sad because it's like, okay, we will continue with the same amount of emissions, and now we have to adapt to that. Whereas we know that mitigation, if we were going to be adopting the best practices to mitigate emissions, still we have heated so much this earth that the emissions will still be in an increase until they stabilize, and then they start to decline. But it seems that as a human or as a society is what we need, humankind, we need to adapt of what is coming, and therefore really not affecting that much, especially for example in human health. We are science is showing that now, for example, different illnesses that are given by different insects that used to be not affecting that much, they are coming back, and we are not having the resources to really protect societies and communities. So health systems need that money to adapt to what's coming to those new illnesses, old illnesses that are now reappearing, for example, especially through mosquitoes and so on, that are extending now times more and more. So I hope that with that I have given more or less an explanation of what you expected, Len.
Great, thank you, Dana. Vasiliki, you next.
Yes, it is not a question, it is something related to mitigation from my perspective as an online participant. So I was mostly an observer of the COP, and I could attend only a number of sessions and not at all the negotiations. It was not an option for the online people. But many of the sessions that I attended included the voices of NGOs, and they were talking a lot about false solutions, and especially with regards to mitigation, specifically talking about carbon capture and storage, which may be an excuse for countries to actually continue with their greenhouse gas emissions because they have this solution, which is actually not a real solution in the end. I read an article. I had a professor when I was doing my PhD at Imperial, and he's now the chair of the IPCC. And he gave an interview in Financial Times where he was talking about carbon capture and storage not being at a position to help with mitigating the emissions right now, because the technology still needs to be consolidated and there is no business plan, not even any kind of regulation from governments of how this can be leveraged. So yeah, this was another angle, I think, of what was happening.
Right.
Sorry to jump in again, but just to comment on what Vasiliki just said. In that film I mentioned, they make and I haven't checked this out, but apparently all the UK's net zero targets and plans are based on the fact that there'll be massive withdrawal of carbon from the atmosphere using technology which currently doesn't exist, which is crazy. Sorry to jump in, Hugh.
Thank you. Very interesting points. I'm sure we can debate that a lot more. Thank you. Hugh, you're next. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. Thanks, Anna, for the detailed presentation there. It's incredible that you're able to be there. So I'm just wondering, this is a question that's easier to ask than to answer, but it seems to, did you get any sense at the COP that there, about a discussion around all the other international efforts to tackle climate change? I'm thinking of, the Sustainable Development Goals process, and the role of the World Bank and UNEP. They all seem to be operating separately from the whole COP process. I put something in the chat that I read the other day. The COP process is about mitigating, in part, greenhouse gas emissions. And yet I read that the World Bank, over the last 8 years, has given $17 billion in grants to fossil fuel projects. So it sort of seems to me that the left hand and the right hand are doing very different things. I know it's a hard question to answer, but did you get any sense that people talk about that at COP and think we need to integrate things more and put all these initiatives together?
Well, I can partially talk about it, and you even see it many times what's happening in there, and the way things are working, it seems quite separate sometimes, that there is not a central strategy going around really putting everyone together, which is many times the effort that the UNFCCC is doing through all these processes. The process per se has become very complex and really really tangled many times for these kind of institutions to really run their programs under those objectives. And what, for example, the SDGs, there is always lots of highlights about the importance of the SDGs for many institutions to adopt them and follow and so on and forward. However, during COP, I remember I attended an event from, I believe it was the UNICEF or it was UNESCO. I cannot remember very well, but the case is that they were talking about the danger of the SDGs disappearing and collapsing because we are not really achieving them. The objectives and the activities, and even though they are very well structured to be adapted and adopted by different institutions, it seems that they are not being successfully embedded within the different bodies. So it seems that they are in danger, and some of them are not really happening. The agenda is not really happening. But by the same token, the discussions continue in other areas, and it's something that is really disappointing to see happening. And I am not an expert in all the fields to say that is not working or that is disjointed, but the feeling I got to have while in the negotiations seemed to be happening exactly like that. That there is these joint efforts going in different directions with institutions running their own initiatives disjointed from other efforts.
Right, thank you. Roz.
Thank you. Yes, this is just really a follow-up question from Hughes. It's more specific around the World Bank. You were saying that the World Bank was the institution that was going to dispense the monies for the compensation for the damage of climate change and the concerns about that. And I wondered if, well, I understand the concerns about that. It seems ridiculous if they're also funding all these big projects on fossil fuels. So was there any discussion about another mechanism for that? Was there any other institution, organization, or way of handling that other than the World Bank? Was that discussed?
It was discussed partially as well. Yes, it was discussed partially. I believe what happens many times in the negotiations is that there are topics that are there in the agendas, and then all of a sudden they are overtaken by whatever the topic of the moment gets to be. And unfortunately, we end up with the presidencies usually get to adopt what they think is relevant for their own objectives to achieve whatever they think is what is really happening. So I personally didn't see it going through really in like it should have been. But I don't know, Vasiliki, if online you got to see another experience.
No, actually, no.
So yeah, me that I was there, I couldn't see it through because probably was displaced at the end as a topic, as topics. We cannot hear you, Rosalind.
Sorry, can I just briefly follow up then? You were saying that this is the first COP where you've seen a big division between the global south and the north. And clearly this relates to what we've been discussing very largely, and that the global south is increasingly feeling that they're not being taken seriously, which they're not, clearly. Is there any optimism about ways to take that forward in a more positive way? The next COP, was there any kind of, was it very pessimistic, or was there some ideas as to how to challenge that at the next COP?
Yes, absolutely. I think the different working groups that parties are having are tackling that, especially, for example, I know G77 and China under the secretary, they are really willing to overcome the differences that were happening in COP28 in different is typical. It's not something that is atypical to the conferences, especially when within the negotiation rooms where you are really sometimes having very heated discussions around it. But COP28 was especially marked by the lack of flexibility really happening from both sides. And I can really tell that there was at times some sort of, very extreme views. And sometimes you were having a physical division in the city rooms where the north was in one side, the south was in another side. So the heads of delegations, for example, highlighted that this could not really happen, that these kind of negotiations are for us to cooperate, for us to have collaboration. And it's stated in the Paris Agreement, it's stated in the different angles of the different documents. So the promotion of cooperation and multilateralism needs to be in practice. And we are hopeful that Baku will bring us back to these concepts in practice, not only in text or not only in the idealistic way we should be working. So we hope that the presidency, the next presidency, and the secretariat will be more proactive in trying to mediate in case there is similar situations as in COP28.
Thank you.
I see a question from Abaru from Peace for Women West Nile. She says that she is from Uganda, and how was the issue of localization agenda? Localization agenda, I cannot recognize the topic. Is that related to the Marrakesh partnership? Or is it another topic that we are talking about? I don't know what the localization agenda, but she has left, so I don't know what she was saying. Sorry, I just saw that in the chat.
Yes, I noticed that as well. I puzzled as well what localization means. I guess it's, in a way, it might be leading into a question I was mulling over about the educational aspects of what was there. And you talked about there was a lot of effort put into the ideas around capacity for education, and I wondered whether that the distinction within that between capacity in the sense of resources and financing, etc., to sort of and building institutions for education, and a different kind of capacity, which is the capability and the knowledge needed to educate in for climate action. So I often differentiate between capability and capacity. There are some places like Wellington College that's got fantastic capability and a huge capacity to educate beautifully, but there are other places in the world that got no capability to do it and very little in the way of capacity. So was there a kind of distinction between those two dimensions of capacity?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. The capacity that we were talking about was more financial, more the resources that are needed for institutions to deliver this kind of quality of education. Basically, there was lots of like discussion around what are those capacities happening, how they are happening in the north, how they are happening in the south. Again, the differentiation on the concepts that we get to see about, for example, how education for climate is perceived in the north and how it's perceived in the south. And how that needs different cultural aspects to be adapted to those communities that will not adapt straight away coming from the north to the south, for example. And that needs finances for governments to really prepare institutions to have that capacity to deliver effective systems on education. So there was a differentiation, yes, but we were really focusing on the financial aspect that was the sticky point, basically, for action for climate empowerment and capacity building in both aspects, especially in action for climate empowerment. What we are trying to say to governments is that education is not the only resource that is important to empower the society against climate change, but that we need access to public information, we need public participation, we need transparency in the processes for countries to be accountable. So basically, the pillars of action for climate empowerment need to be really taken on board, and not only education, which has been the main focus of governments, basically.
Right. Okay. I'll let Vasiliki come in with a question there. I'd like to come back in a minute on another topic aspect of that education. So Vasiliki.
Yeah, I have 2 points to make. One is related to education. One is about the previous question about the World Bank. I attended some of the sessions on transparency online. So there were discussions about developing a framework on how countries can actually collect data on how they are emitting greenhouse gases and what they are doing in terms of mitigation and adaptation. But there was no discussion about how international organizations should be transparent as well. So that was an interesting dimension. Regarding education, I attended some of the sessions on education that were available online, but not any negotiations. What I personally saw, and this, I don't know, surprised me, is how much different is the language depending on which session you are attending. For example, there are sessions where people are talking about education for sustainable development. You go to another session, they talk about environmental education, especially the one that has to do with the rights of children, because there was an interesting development about the environmental rights of children to a safe, sustainable, and clean environment. And that was discussed at the COP. And then there was the adaptation, education related to adaptation and resilience. And then there was climate change education. And I'm wondering if this is actually dividing people instead of, providing a coherent narrative around education and what education is trying to achieve. I think even education for sustainable development is something that governments are finding difficult to implement. And when we are including all those different other concepts, I'm not sure how this, how this can be taken forward in the end.
Right. Thank you. Roz, would you like to come in? Yeah. You're muted again. Oops.
Sorry about that.
Here she
Sorry
is.
about that. Couldn't find it. Couldn't find the button. Yeah, I was going to ask you, Anna, in particular, that you work with young, very privileged young people right across the globe, don't you? Do you find that there's coming from them, there is a passion and a commitment to address these issues? How optimistic do they make you feel that they're going to take it forward in their lives? And they're obviously going to be influences in the future coming from the background they have and the education they're getting at Wellington colleges around the world. So I wondered if that gave you a source of optimism and positivity.
Absolutely. I think I have been in this institution because precisely my hopes are there. And it's sometimes challenging to find those students that are really passionate and really committed to the topic, but they are there. And I can share with you, we had a very good practice from one of the students that said, I want to lead on something related to the negotiations. And we decided, I said, okay, I will support you. I will facilitate this process for you. So we decided to create a mock COP. We in the UK coordinate the Berkshire Schools Eco Network, that is a network of 12 schools. We have 6 independent schools, 6 state schools, and all together we did a mock COP. And then from that exercise, we wrote a declaration, student declaration, that then we invited and shared internationally with our family and other partners internationally. So at the end, this declaration was endorsed by more than 7,000 students internationally. And this student committed personally to deliver this in the COP. So my work was really making the ground for her to meet with decision makers, to listen and to meet her with this declaration. And once we came back, she said, but how can we follow this now? I just don't want it to be in paper and be forgotten. So now, for example, she's part of Yongo. She is now part of the whole youth movement to try to raise this with a champion and to continue their work. We are continuing the work from the side of Wellington College International. And very happily, I can share that many students, when they hear from other peers about what they are doing, they get that motivation. And is something I am really applying into Wellington, which is the concept of intergenerational equity, in which I'm not the expert, I'm the facilitator of that learning, and I'm learning together with them. And I make them feel empowered by that we can collaborate with my experience and with their initiatives and experience as well, bringing these kind of exercises out in the reality. And that is a very nice and optimistic way to see how new generations can feel empowered, especially when I know they will be decision makers and people in the future that can have a strong influence in how the things are working internationally. So yes, that's my answer.
Thank you.
Thank you. Vasiliki, you noticed that Abaru is back in. Abaru, would you like to ask your question about localization? We were wondering what you meant by it. I think she must be coming in from Uganda. Connection's not good. No. Okay, let's move on then to Martin. You have a.
Yes, I have a question on publishers. Publishers are a major pillar in the educational system. Were they represented at all at COP28? Is there an interest among publishers from primary school books to university textbooks? Is there an interest among them to make books or have people write books for them on climate issues?
I personally see as attendant of the COPs that there is always lots of different publishers with different reports, different books to talk about education and so on, especially coming from different specialized NGOs that they are working in the field. Specifically for publishers, I don't know if they are having, for example, special agreements with some of these NGOs or universities or specialized think tankers, for example. But there is always a very rich set of bibliography that you can find during COPs that are usually given for free, and that they are presented otherwise for you to receive the example of the publication once you're back, or online as PDF files and so on. So there is always very strong driver of presentation of new publications during COPs about education, especially many other fields in all the areas. But when we are in the side of education, yes, you get to see that there is a very strong driver there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, you come back in.
Sorry, yeah, I've got another question. I don't want to monopolize, but I was just going to say that myself and Martin work with COP28, which is an NGO supporting community empowerment, to promote community empowerment. I mean, one of the reasons we do this is, the example is shown here, how difficult it is to get things changed at a top level, a high level, and so we're focusing on the bottom-up approach, really, and thinking that it's no good waiting for governments or local authorities or even global authorities to take the initiative. Local groups and people need to take in hand the issues that really concern us all. And to that end, one of the things we've recently produced is the Climate Action Handbook, which is available for any community group, available free online on www.com8.org. And also with Schumacher. This was something produced with Schumacher and Com8, and it's available on the Schumacher website as well, I believe. Is that right, Ian?
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
And gives many examples of how people can get started and the way to run groups and organizations that are starting from the local level and wanting to make change, starting at the local level, not necessarily ending there, but starting there. And I just wondered if there was any discussion at all at the COP about community level engagement and work on climate action, or any support that was being given to it and addressing it.
Yes, there is always the group that is precisely leads local governments and communities and municipalities, that is led by different organizations that work with cities and with local governments, and they are the ones that always work precisely with communities, and they are always very active, highlighting the importance of empowering communities, local governments, and how there should be a strong communication in between national governments and these communities and decision makers in municipalities and local governments. ICLAY, that is an organization such as C40, they are some of the ones that are usually leading those discussions. ICLAY is very well recognized in Europe, but not only within Europe, but internationally, and because they have lots of members, lots of local governments, communities, and municipalities. And C40 is more city-based, but they have that strong driver, precisely that communities are coming first. So yes, it's always a very strong topic.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ross. Anybody else got any more questions?
Khadija, I think.
Sorry?
Khadija, I think, has got her hand up.
Ah.
Khadija Husseini.
Khadija?
I think Khadija, I see her screen, but I don't see her hand.
No, I haven't got a hand up.
Oh, okay, I've got one on my screen, so that's strange.
Right. I'll have a chat with Khadija later. Yep. She's one of my brilliant students, so I'm very pleased that she's here. And Vasiliki, one of the sort of more slightly general question about the educational aspect of it, was there a sense that the education that's being talked about is for what I will call micro action, things that individuals and communities and small businesses, etc., can do at that scale? Or is the education being talked about the global picture, and particularly the political picture that that pertains to climate issues? You know, I just wondered whether that was part of the debate at all.
You wanna go first, Vasiliki?
So yeah, from the sessions and the side events that I attended, the discussion was about formal education a lot. You know, what schools, universities are doing in terms of education, how it is incorporated in curricula. There were sessions where NGOs who are delivering informal education also talked about their work, but I did not see any connections with businesses, for example.
No.
There were this high-level discussions such as how governments can actually enable climate change education, but not specifically education in a broader sense, you know, how it connects all the dots in a community or in society. I did not see that, but I have like a partial view of the COP because of what I was able to attend.
Yeah.
From the negotiation ground, I can tell you that it's a more broader and political perspective rather than being very individual based and more like empowering individuals. So if from the aspect of action for climate empowerment is very much aligning to how much the governments can really change their current policies to really make schools part of a whole process that is united to the national determined contributions, achievements or goals that are established there. Obviously, this aligns quite a lot in which is the capacity that the current institutions and their educators have to really make students effective agents of change, for example. So it goes very much from that broader agenda to the particular. But what is discussed really in the negotiation tables is something more national, something more political, something that goes more in how much the countries are keen in changing their education systems for the adoption of that concept of climate change within the curriculum, for example, that is not something that is outside, or like Vasiliki was highlighting very rightly, how are we seeing the topic of climate change? Are we seeing it through the lens of environmental education, of climate education, of sustainability, ESD, and so on? It's still a way to go to have a common ground of understanding, because different countries have adopted it in different ways, in which is more convenient for them to fulfill those goals that are national and fulfill the standards of the NDCs, which is not necessarily climate education, but probably is environmental education and outdoor learning.
So not a strong emphasis on critique of the existing order, as you might say. No. Thank you. Right. Saul, have you got a question there?
Oh, yes, I do. I hope my levels are okay.
Yeah,
just about.
Good. Let me just turn that up. Okay, I'm just getting used to Zoom. I'm not a big Zoomer. The question I had, or the point I wanted to raise, and excuse my incarnation here, I don't have a camera, believe it or not. When we're talking about putting information out into the world, I'm just pasting a link into your chat now, into the chat, for a YouTube video by Lex Friedman, who you might be aware of. And his platform is reaches around the world, as you might know. and we're talking about quite casual conversations and one-to-ones. He gets the very best in the world to come and talk to him. And I personally think that, although I agree with educational programs and toolkits, etc., I think that one of the best ways to get this information out there is to have this kind of discussion, or a sort of one-to-one, say two of the best from this group, or you couple up, or however you wanted to do it, to sit and have a long form conversation and to discuss quite openly everything that we're discussing here today, and to just publish that to the world. And I think that's one of the best ways to reach people, because then they can sort of sit in the room with you, not be in a Zoom meeting, but to sit in the room. And I wonder if that's something that's interesting to anyone here, and if you have any links or any ideas of where that's being done already. Thanks.
Thank you, Tom. Right. And any thoughts that you'd like to sort of sum up with now, maybe, Vasiliki and Anna?
Well, as educator, what we are doing very much is, for example, talks around, we call it open community coffee talks. So, for example, we gather together and we try to do it face to face, where the classrooms are open for the community. In this case, in our area, Crowthorne, Sandhurst, Woking, and Bracknell, and we invite the community to come and talk to us, or them inviting to set the topic that we are going to be talking about. And yes, I agree, it's a very rich way in which lots of ideas, lots of actions can be taken and really coming from the communities. I believe that there is different initiatives now taking place like that. For example, there is groups that how is it called? Green drinks, for example, that they gather together and they have drinks in a pub and talking about these topics. I believe TED Talks are a great way as well to approach wider audiences and having those discussions. Obviously, that's with an expert and then interacting with those that are invited, but then they are streamed in YouTube and then you can watch them and so on. So I believe that there is different attempts of having those conversations, open conversations, and face-to-face, and not using that much the technology that is sometimes limiting, like this one that is Zoom. We have a project as well, for example, in our college, in which every year we bring a container. It's a gold container that has the technology for us to connect internationally with different portals and have transformative conversations with different topics. So we set a week or 2 weeks with different themes. It can be human rights, it can be faith, it can be peace and conflict, it can be arts, it can be climate change. So we put a schedule, and then we are connecting to Barbados, to Mexico, to Kigali. In the past, we were connecting to Gaza. And a group or amount of people were meeting other group of people in those portals. And then we could have from a concert in music to a dance, traditional dance, to have a dinner together. And the difference is that in comparison to this technology, that technology is making you feel that you are really in the same room with those people. So we were trying to establish this kind of soft skills and competencies that you can develop in that learning process of transformative conversations. So that's another way that we have, that I know that this could work. So I don't know if I am answering what you are thinking is the concept that you mentioned.
That's great. No, that's great. You give me some good links there. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Right. Okay. Well, I'd like to say a big thank you to both of you for Vasiliki for organising this, and for Anna for a fantastic presentation. If there's any last comments from anybody, that'd be fine. Yeah, we've got clapping.
I think Ross wants to say something.
No,
No.
think we've got clapping going on. Yeah.
Okay, it's a club. Okay. Thank you so much, Ian. I think this was a very, very good event. And it gave us the opportunity to start those conversations that Sol was talking about. Maybe we can have an in-person meeting at some point to continue, I guess.
Indeed.
At least, as RC London, we can have an in-person meeting and discuss further, I guess.
That would be great. You're really all very welcome to Bristol. And Anna, when you do come down, you might be in time for, there's an event almost every week called the Green Mingle, which is a similar thing to green drinks, but it's open to anybody across the city to come and join that.
Thank you. I will let you know when I am there in
Great.
Bristol.
That'd be brilliant indeed.
Thank you.
Well, again, thank you very much, everybody, for that, and I look forward to seeing you all again. Right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Have a good
Great to
Bye.
meet you all.
Thank
Brilliant.
you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Good stuff.